This is the Power of Public Value podcast from Cardiff Business School, where we explore the positive impact of public value in everything we do. My name is Peter Wells. I am Pro-Dean of Public Value here in Cardiff Business School, and our guest today is Dr Hakan Karaosman. Hakan is a lecturer in the Logistics and Operations Management section of Cardiff Business School. His main interest lies in understanding the intersection between social and environmental issues in complex fashion supply chains. In this episode, we will be investigating how Hakan embodies the idea of an activist academic in his work and how that relates to public value within the school. Welcome, Hakan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Peter. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction and the warm welcome.
And yes, some of the guests in this podcast series have brought in objects, little things that can spark a conversation. And in a way, you are wearing yours. And I wonder if you could say something about this.
Yes, absolutely. It was a great idea because actually I brought this a scarf what I'm wearing, and this is from 2012 or 2013, 10 years ago. I bought this from a secondhand store, and I keep this and treasure this because it brings lots of memories, but also it brings me to the feeling of love and respect and kindness. And I wanted to wear this today for you, just to bring the importance of fashion, clothing, but also the aspect of belonging, respect, and kindness.
Yes, and I think as we'll probably explore in this episode, the emotional content of consumer products generally, but clothing as well, is perhaps one of the things we've lost in the recent past, and one of the reasons why it has become a less sustainable industry. But first of all, let's start with this idea of the activist academic. And this is something you said to me a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting description. I wonder what it means. And perhaps you could explain a little bit about what your vision is of an activist academic.
Thank you, Peter. To me, I'm a person that wants to ask questions and that wants to provoke discussions and conversations. I want to feel something. And then when I write or when I speak, I want people to feel something. And I want to create my research with substance, with real-life evidence. And I want to use my voice to change something. And in this context, which is fashion in my research, my mother was a garment worker. And I was raised in a house that was part of a fashion supply chain. Even I wasn't aware, but my mother was working.
So she was a home worker.
Home worker. And she was doing lots of embroidery and beautiful things. So she was a worker. And all I remember was my mother, like literally creating fashion and embroidering for 15, 16 hours a day. Wow. And then us carrying those big plastic bags to her agent. Right. And we never saw a label because labels were always to get attached later on. Right. So we were never actually aware what brands she was creating things for. So this was my vivid memory. And then when I came to my professional life, I'm an environmental engineer, and I wanted to bring this sustainability perception to the fashion industry, which is labor dependent and really labor intensive. So there's a really big connection between the people side and the nature side. Right. But fashion operations are not doing its job. So there's this big detachment between the brands and the reality. So I wanted to bring this social justice aspect to the environmental transitions in this people-oriented industry. And going back to your question, why I'm an activist? Because I want to provoke conversations to talk about uncomfortable things that should change. And my research somehow wants to become an instrument for people to provoke ideas, to bring them tools or inspirations, but also with the students, I want them to feel like they are part of this. This is a big multi-stakeholder conversation. We can't change things overnight. We are all part of this big transition in today's world. But today's world is characterized by climate change, social inequality, many different intertwined crises. So we are part of this. And as a researcher, I try to use my voice to inspire people to say something and to be part of this big conversation.
Interesting. But how do you're always very upbeat, you're very positive character. How do you keep that in the face of, well, you must feel like, you're one voice and then there's a huge sea of problems. How do you stay positive? How do you stay motivated?
Well, it is not easy, but I'm determined because number one, I do my research for the people that don't have a voice. I use my voice, I use my platform to actually bring those realities to the spotlight. So it is my ultimate inspiration. So farmers, workers, home workers, or little Hakans, they don't see the silver lining in that big storm. But as a researcher, when I first started, Peter, I was crucified. I was told fashion wasn't a context in which I could publish.
Right.
Because also in academia, we have some measures against which we are measured. And I was told, number one, I didn't look like a person that read. I was told.
Really?
Yes. And
I'm quietly appalled.
But the thing is, I was appalled as well, but it was a really big wake-up call.
Sure.
And I realized, actually, no, I needed to justify that my voice belongs and I belong to this world.
Yes.
So just because I love fashion or I love to talk about fashion doesn't mean that I cannot be that intelligent person asking questions. So actually, it took so long for me to own my individuality.
Right.
But then at the end, now I tell everyone, to my students, to my friends, being who you are doesn't preclude being intelligent.
Right.
So that's the first interaction with academia was quite harsh.
Sure.
Because I was literally.
So you had no kind of legitimacy in terms of the arena that you were trying to work in.
Exactly. And it took so long for me to understand where I actually belonged. Operations, supply chain, fashion, business. But along the way, I learned how to navigate what I wanted to say and how actually I can own my own agency. And here, the person that I need to thank eternally is Donna Marshall from University College Dublin.
Yes.
And she was one of the first persons that told me that you belong and you have a voice, just use it and believe in what you are saying.
Interesting.
When I realized, actually, I could give a message rather than somehow trying to sound like how people want me to sound, then it was a big wake-up call. So I realized, actually, I needed to own my agency. And then when that realization came, then that self-esteem and self-love manifested with my work. And then I decided to use my work to actually help other people to own their own agency. And this activist researcher part actually plays a huge and integral part. And I just try to engage with people and I try to give them my platform so that we all together can challenge the system.
Yes. So, you've given us a really vivid description of why and how you became an activist academic and how does that manifest itself in terms of reaching out to different audiences?
And you said earlier something so important, reaching out to different people, to different the communities. To me, the conversations should be plural and each voice must be heard. And when I speak with people, I try to engage with multiple communities and different backgrounds. Here, it was also quite important for me to understand how I can also translate my research into operational suggestions and recommendations because there's a big mismatch between academia and the industry and policymakers. So what do we do as researchers? We conduct research, but then we need to come up with innovative and creative ways to explain why what we do matters and how people can use it. So this was a big mismatch when I was doing my PhD. I was reading articles that I even didn't understand. People somehow were publishing for the sake of publications, and then policymakers and industry
had no connection.
Yeah. And that detachment for me was a big wake-up call.
Sure.
And I actually told myself, okay, perhaps I can find a way to explain what I do to those people. And then collaboration is the future. Collaboration and partnership is everything. So if we talk about social dialogues, we can't do this in isolation. I teamed up with people from the industry, from NGOs, from trade unions, from media. And actually, when you approach those people with questions and suggestions, not with negativity, but with positivity, then actually they form these partnership conversations, and then you try to create something together. And it worked. I was in Italy for my PhD, and at the time, fast fashion, the luxury, there was a huge dark gap. People were just consuming for the sake of consuming something. There was no emotional attachment. and some NGOs were asking questions, but their tone was really negative. And even though with those legitimate questions, people were not engaging.
Yeah, of course, they run
because
the other
they
way.
were scared.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to say I was the person that brought all of those together, but at least I was one of those trying to join the dots. And it worked. We organized lots of webinars, in-person settings, just to create conversations. And then it actually gives me lots of hope that people are here to listen. It's just we need to find a common way to explain what we want to talk about and how we can make it inclusive and diverse.
Yeah, interesting. Because it seems to me that maybe you've taken your work into territories which, frankly, people don't tend to go into the far reaches of the supply chain, to workers who have really no representation or anything like that, and no power really. But at the same time, speaking from the outside looking in, and it's your world, not mine, I wonder, how much agency they really have in the face of kind of consuming practices which are heavily orientated towards the fast consumption of expensive luxury goods.
Absolutely. Number one, fashion industry is characterized by power imbalance. Brands are so powerful, but most of them don't produce anything. They outsource and they buy things from their suppliers. And they oftentimes, they are only linked with their direct suppliers, tier one. And then the lower tiers, they are always so out of sight, out of mind. So, but this lack of transparency, lack of traceability, and lack of power distribution impede any sort of transition. And brands won't protect this because this is the system that makes them so rich. And of course, they don't want to empower people, even though they talk about commitments or climate goals and everything. When we look at the evidence, what we see is top-down decision-making. So they come up with goals, but who sets those goals? Brands. Who comes up with decisions? Brands. Who somehow dictate what must be done? Brands. So then this lack of communication and lack of inclusion doesn't sit well with me as a person. So then in my research, I go to lower tiers to understand what actually we can learn from them. And you are also a transition person. So when we look at the transitions are all about social dialogues. It's all about conversations. So it is so interesting for me to realize fashion cannot become sustainable unless we challenge the underlying conditions. So today there's lots of conversations and commitments and all those fancy stuff, but no one is actually trying to challenge the underlying conditions that brought us to this dark hole in the first place. And when I look at the transitions from other disciplines, automotive, renewable energy, etc., the success factor is all about inclusion and representation, going back to the agency. So if we don't involve those people to these conversations, then at the end, it will be too late because we will not learn from their experiences. Also, we will not get what they need. At the end, we will create intergenerational social consequences for many people, mostly for the workers.
Indeed, and you can't build sustainability on that kind of inequality. Obviously, it's a fundamental flaw.
Absolutely. Can I give one example?
You may.
Many years ago, circular economy was launched in the context of fashion. I was really critical. I asked this question, do we think the landscape is enabling us to talk about this paradigm shift? I wasn't acknowledged, I wasn't heard, and I wasn't silenced because I was so provocative, so I was using my voice, but I was ignored. After 6-7 years, we see that circular economy that was coined in those years just enabled them to legitimize a business model, perpetuating overconsumption and overproduction.
Interesting.
So the thing is, if we talk about paradigm shifts, we need to talk about long-term societal transformations with the people. So everyone must be involved in these transitions from the beginning of time. Otherwise, exclusive decision-making, like what we see every single day, they will only bring short-term gains for the power holder, not for the people that will be affected by those transitions.
And I can see that, obviously you're personally very passionate about your work. I wondered, your relatively recent arrival in the business school.
Yes.
And I wondered, what was it that kind of made you feel that you would fit here in the school, and how do you think your work resonates with our public value ethos?
It is interesting because actually Cardiff University was my dream destination. And it happened, and I still don't know how it happened, but I'm so pleased. So thanks God it happened. The thing is, Peter, the things that we talk is really difficult to digest. We talk about capitalism, we talk about radical change, we talk about enabling lower tier suppliers, workers, or farmers. So we talk about paradigm shift. Not every institution enables these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And what I am so in love with Cardiff University is the commitment to the people. I'm a people's person. I do my research for the people. I care for them, and I want to somehow help them to find their agency. I can't work in a traditional business school that will ask me to publish for the sake of metrics or indications, whatever. I want to do my research with substance, and that's why I wanted to be here, because your values and your vision, personally and institutionally, are linked with mine. Right. I can't fake things. Right. I can't be a different researcher when I have this passion within me. So I wanted to be here, and that's why I'm here, because we talk about the same language and the same values and same principles, putting people front and center.
And I see it also in your teaching, and I wondered if you can explain a bit about how your research guides not just the content of what you teach, but how you actually go about teaching.
Act of empathy is so important to me. And I always ask myself what I would like to learn and how I would like to learn it. And then when I am in that position, I often tell my students, I'm a facilitator and I'm here to facilitate this conversation. I am not a traditional teacher, and this is not a passive learning. We need to talk, and this is a dialogue. So I bring down lots of examples, not necessarily from the fashion industry, because I'm also aware there are other examples that also other interests. So I need to cater to multiple backgrounds, but I bring lots of examples and discussions. So I share lots of media articles, also theoretical articles, but also YouTube videos or different creative tools, because also students are changing.
Yes,
the
indeed.
Young kids are actually using tools that I even wasn't aware exist. So I try to actually be innovative and creative in the way I teach, so then they relate to what I'm talking. And when that connection actually is established, then magic happens, because then they start asking questions with their personal choices.
Yes.
And at the end of the semester, when I evaluate their assignments, I realize actually many of my points were
and you begin to see that kind of mindset changing.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's the point.
Yes.
So for me, the biggest legacy is to bring this mindset. And when I see students actually changing their habits or asking questions, then I feel really happy.
That's interesting, because funny enough, I mean, I often start my lecture series with a very basic statement: I don't care if they pass or fail. And I really, that's my starting point. I'm interested and passionate about getting them to change the way they think, their position in the world, and their responsibility. And I think this is a very interesting area that you, I think, have highlighted, this notion of personal responsibility. It's not something abstract. And I get that you have that passion, but how do you get past this idea of just presenting a very grim analysis into something which is perhaps more forward-looking and more solutions orientated than simply saying, "Oh, the world's terrible and let's all go home"?
Well, there's hope, and hope must be established in any context. So I'm a really positive person, and I just try to tell them we need to remember the importance of love and empathy and kindness, and every single choice that we have has consequences for a broader society and the communities. And when students or anyone that I speak, also from media, also from companies, when they start realizing how their daily choices also can somehow enact change, or how they can become part of this conversation, it works. The only point is to understand how we can create this common ground in which we can come together, because oftentimes people don't listen. They think they do, but they don't listen, and then they don't understand. And lack of interpretation or misperceptions impede these social dialogues. Going back to your question, I just try to explain to them what they wear is a tool to express who they are,
Mm-hmm.
but also we want to wear things that we should be proud of. If a piece of t-shirt or trousers come from really questionable fashion operations, it is not okay. Of course, a regular lay consumer doesn't have to know all of those technical details. But the thing is, we need to question and we need to start asking those questions. The skin is the largest organ in our body. And when we put clothing on, chemicals, everything that goes into those products actually just come
It's
into
in
our
contact
bodies.
with us, of course. Yeah.
And then the health implications, number one, has always been a really big driving force. So people started asking questions. But then when we bring them to the journey of supply chain workers and the farmers and everything else in that broader context, we explain your choices actually can support them and then help us change the system. So it is then students often ask me how we can be part of this. But then along the way, they realize actually they have this amazing power, which is called purchasing power. And when they ask questions, brands need to answer. Here, I also find it so important to speak with policymakers because policymakers always look for easy solutions and short-term objectives because they need to deliver deadlines, etc. So they need to produce things for short term, but we need to explain short-term interventions are often technical, market-based, etc., but they have long-term societal consequences.
Sure.
And this big tension and paradoxical issue between what we should be doing now and what will happen as a consequence actually makes many people scared.
Right.
So we need to explain how we can create tools by actually understanding those long-term consequences. So then we can inform today's decisions.
Yeah, so it's a difficult balance, but also I think aside from the kind of social outreach and impact, it's quite difficult for us as individual academics, and by that I mean, you mentioned briefly this question of metrics and how we as academics are traditionally, particularly in business schools, traditionally measured. But as soon as you go down the route that you've gone down, I mean, you've produced all sorts of things for all sorts of people, and a large proportion of your work in that sense is not within traditional metrics. And I don't mean this as a criticism at all. In fact, it's praise.
Thank you.
But what I would like to know from you is then how do you evaluate your own efforts in that sense? How do we measure Hakan?
Yeah.
How do we say he's done well?
To me, like it's a very good question. But to me, my legacy in this world is love and respect. And I just try to, again, provoke conversations. And to me, the measure of success is impact and how you actually inspire people to create things with impact. I am so purpose driven, and my purpose is to create impact. We can discuss how to measure impact, but in my world, impact is not to be measured with financial indicators or traditional old-fashioned indicators such as H-index or number of citations or all of those boring stuff. What I'm trying to do is to help people understand how they can become change agents and how we can collectively create this. And I collaborate a lot with people. I partner with different scholars or activist researchers because this is a big battle. Although I don't like the word battle, but this is a really difficult landscape to change from academia to our operations and everything else that we are operating in. The system is completely old-fashioned. So we need to find means to actually change things. So I collaborate with people and how I understand if I do well or I never actually ask that question to myself because I don't, maybe I'm scared of being self-destructive. So I don't even
Right. You
think
don't want
of
to be too analytical
success
about that. Yeah.
I'm just trying to do what I do with passion, with love.
Right.
And
so then you think the legacy follows naturally as a consequence?
Because I think success is not an objective. It is an outcome. And I try to orchestrate my actions to result in positivity and nice things. And if it is to be framed as success, then let it be the outcome. But I don't start with that objective in mind. I don't want to become successful or famous or whatever. If my voice is heard, if I'm acknowledged, then the fame can come as an organic result. But I am not after that. I'm
It's an
after
interesting
those
one,
conversations.
Because we recently had an accreditation visit, and one of the major points of discussion was how do we as a school evaluate how well we're doing in our public value mission. And then we have a slight issue because, as you have very eloquently described, a lot of the things we want to see happen are not really amenable to measure, and we don't particularly want to measure them. And one of the problems if we do start measuring is that we start being kind of benchmarked against these things. And this is a complete antithesis against what we want to achieve.
Exactly.
So I think we have to find ways to articulate this. I think your contribution today has been really, really good in that respect, because you've given us a very different view, talking about the importance of love and respect and just caring for others in a way as being central to your work. And it sounds very abstract until I have you in front of me, making it very real in your world of fashion and supply chain. So, I think I'd really like to thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter.
I think perhaps what you have not yet quite explained, and I just want to kind of capture this point at the end, is the relationship between your activist mission, so to speak, and your domain expertise, the way in which you're very well informed about this world. You know this world very well. And I wonder how far that in itself is important to your legitimacy as you seek to progress as an activist academic.
Thank you, Peter. It's another wonderful question. So what I do in my life is I conduct my research based on evidence. So I try to detach myself as a person. Because in this research, in this world, when we do research, especially action research, you are always in the field. You are always with those people. So it was difficult to detach and then again attach myself to the reality. But I conduct my research with the people. So I am bringing their perspective, but we are doing this together legitimately. So I build everything based on evidence. So when I go to LinkedIn with my provocative posts, I just don't talk about what I think should be right, but I actually represent all the evidence I am bringing with my research. So I actually bring their perspective to the front line. And one example which I wanted to give, going back to the KPIs and measurements, when I look at just transitions, all I see is social innovation is context specific. Everything is issue based. We can't generalize things. And this is where we fail as a society, because we try to create KPIs that will work for everyone. We try to create models that would fit in all the sizes. No, actually, it is not how things should work. And then when I speak with suppliers, workers, they have tacit knowledge in terms of decarbonization, in terms of efficiency, in terms of social respect, but they don't have the means to explain those information that can help us create amazing decisions. So brands need to measure, and they come up with industry tools and standardized governance mechanisms, but they fail to measure what really matters in the field. At the end, suppliers manipulate data. They play with numbers, because also people that come up with KPIs don't have technical knowledge. This is interesting and dangerous. People coming up with KPIs don't know how to measure things. And then when they go and check data, they even don't know what they are looking at. And at the end, things are flawed and manipulated. So going back to the public value, KPIs and success and everything, maybe we should start this as an internal conversation. Why do we think we should measure things, and how we can measure things? Because in between, there are many things that actually can't be even measured because they're really specific.
And at the moment, our main measure is to create narratives, as we are doing today. And this indeed was part of the response back to the accreditation body to say, look, it's so diverse. We have so many different things going on. They are all unified by this notion of public value, but it's quite an elusive concept. partly deliberately, because what it gives is people like yourself the freedom to interpret and act in the way that they see fit.
Absolutely. And can I add something? And at the moment, I am a chair at an association called Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion, UCRF. And there, what we do is we actually create letters and opinion pieces to the policymakers.
Okay.
So we demand a seat in certain decision-making tables to actually bring scientific evidence. So our world, our research can also create amazing implications. We just need to find creative ways to explain this to the policymakers that they need to be informed, and we are here to help them understand things. And this is also one of my legacies that I want to create in this world. Impact for the people by speaking with people in power to create policy regulations.
Interesting. Well, Hakan, I mean, we could chat all day. And, you know, as you know, I'm a major fan of your work, and also a major fan of your willingness and drive to communicate. And I think that's something that we perhaps have in common. So I'd like to thank you for shining a light into the sometimes obscure world of fashion, and also how it relates to our work here and how it relates to that lovely idea of the activist academic. In this episode, we've explored how public value can be used as a guide for the actions of an activist academic. Thank you for listening. This has been the Power of Public Value podcast from Cardiff Business School.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
Wonderful.
you very much.
Thank you.